Good morning. This is Jen the Liberty Lion. Today I want to talk about a few things that I've been talking about for years now, and I'm going to once again explain some of this stuff. And I'm going to use some things that I've gotten from the law library, some things from the internet. Like, for example, this is a picture of a book directly from the law library. I've got um, a book called West's Legal Thesaurus Dictionary, a resource for the writer and the computer researcher by William P. Statsky, published in 1985. This is probably one of my favorite dictionaries because it is a legal dictionary. And so it goes over the use of terms when they're used legally. So legal dictionaries are not generally dictionaries that give us the meaning of a word the way it's used in everyday common or normative language, but the way it's used for purposes of contracting. And my theory with the proof that I have is that basically every tyrannical act that occurs from our government outside the Constitution is done by way of contract. Um, I have this is again a picture from a book in the law library. Those are my fingers down there. And I have a few other things, as well as what most people understand as our well-known history about the Civil War. And I'm going to put pieces together for you so that you can understand exactly, I hope, the tyranny and what has gone wrong in this country. Your dog's outside. Okay, so let's get started. So one of the things that they do is they allow the um, the government allows its agencies to sort of make laws, or actually policies, but they allow them to contract with people. And those contracts then create law for the people who contract. So if you go to a dealership and they say, we'll let you have this car for so much money, providing you pay it every month, and in return, we get a percentage rate for giving you the loan, and so on and so forth. You know how car loans work. But if you don't pay, we're going to come get the car and it's going to go on your credit report and such and such. So this is just the whole system is a legal situation. Legal means contract. Okay. This is a contract situation. Agencies of the government are given the right to make contracts with basically anybody they want. So what they do is they go out there and they make contracts with us, private citizens, and pretend that it's the law. But once you make the contract and sign it, it becomes the law because the law is in the contract, right? I've been saying that for a long, long time. The law is in the contract. Now I'm going to show you, I'm going to go over a little bit of history here. And then I'm going to show you proof directly from the law library. I just got to find it. Um, so what happened was when the founders wrote the Constitution, they wrote a constitution that was supposed to be, or was intended to be at that time, a military police establishment. So when they did that, they created a state because a state is a political situation, which creates a status. That status applies to certain people. Like when you join the military, you become a member of the federal state, right? So when the federal constitution uses state, it's talking about the state of the people in that political status. So they're talking about the people in the military or the government that administers the affairs of the military Congress. So this state then is inside the republics because the process was a formal legal process and it's completely lined out. And I wrote about it in my book, and it is cut and dry and very clear. What they did was they fought a war, became independent, and wrote the Declaration of Independence. This is a formal legal process that one of the founders stated it has to be a formal legal process so that later it cannot be argued about, it cannot be turned upside down, it cannot be repealed due to some legal problem. So once the Declaration of Independence was written, they created the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation was when the states got together and called themselves specifically, quote, the United States of America. That's what the states are called. When they sent a representative to a meeting, the meeting was called a Congress, and they called themselves, when they performed certain acts, the United States of America and Congress assembled. And that's the formal and legal and true enacting clause for when the states get together. When the states get together as civilians or a civil entity, they formally call themselves the United States of America and Congress assembled. In the Articles of Confederation, they created a military. That military was given an enacting clause that was formalized. So the military Congress is the United States and Congress assembled. So, so then when a state wanted to join the Union, it had to first have a Republican form of government with a Republican constitution written, and that written constitution represented or was the status, which is a situation or a situs. The state that you sit in is your situs or your status, your state, for the civil people, the people not in the military. And those people were citizens of that state. So, for example, state of Texas had a republic constitution, and the first one or two of them didn't work out right? They took it to the federal government, and the federal government and them got together, sort of like they would when making a treaty. They get together with the other people, the other party, and they agree on terms, and they write it down, and then they formalize it, pass it, whatever. So each state, before they joined the Union, was supposed to have a republic form of government written down in the Constitution. And our Constitution is the Republic of Texas Constitution. We have a republic here, Republic of Texas. It still exists today, or it's supposed to exist today. It had to have this Republic Constitution in order to join the Union. It could not join the Union without this Constitution. So, how did we get from Republic of Texas to State of Texas? Simple. after they joined the Union and the Republic Constitution was accepted by the federal government, the Republic Constitution was then for the civilians, but they needed another constitution, which was for the military. After Texas joined the Union, they needed a military constitution that did not um, abrogate or undo or conflict with Texas laws, the Republic of Texas. So um, each state then had a state inside of it, and that state was the federal state, the military state. Remember, I showed you just recently that the federal government and the federal constitution created a military peace establishment. And Hamilton went to speak to one of his friends. He wrote a letter, actually. And he was saying to him, this was someone in France, I think, hey, brother, do you mind helping us write our military constitution? Right? I use the words very liberally, but that's basically what he said. He said, hey, you're a friend of ours, you're French. The French love their liberty and their freedom. Why don't you come help us write our military constitution? I don't think the guy did because his name's not on it. He may have been advisory as far as writing letters back and forth. Um, and that was before the Constitution was written, but after the Articles of Confederation was written. So they knew when they wrote the Constitution that they needed a military constitution. They knew they had to do this. So they wrote the military constitution. And then when each state joined the Union, they accepted that new state into their state. It was a lined out process. It was completely lined out, legal, formal process that was strictly followed to ensure that everything was legit, right? Because if you have a contract and there's a problem with the contract can be null and void. And the last thing they wanted was a country with a voidable military contract, because then they would be left defenseless. They would have no military except for the militaries in the state. And they knew from problems they suffered with the Revolutionary War that that would be very bad, that they cannot rely on state militias to win a war. It just wouldn't happen. They needed a central military. So this state of Texas constitution became the constitution that was agreed upon between the Republic of Texas and the federal government. So we have here, and this is recent, and still that's my finger there on this page. That's me holding the book, not something that came off the internet and nobody really knows if it's real or not. Those of you who have followed me for a long time know um, I post things that are true. They're real. I don't create documents and post them as if they came from somewhere else. So this is the Texas jurisprudence. I believe it's the same in every state. It's just that some states um, probably hide it a little bit better. I've heard some states like Oregon that they don't even have a republic constitution. If they don't have a republic constitution, I wonder could they have ever even joined the union? Because that was one of the formal legal processes that were required in order to join the union. They had to have a republic form of government. During the Civil War, when the states were taken over, um, and all the mind games were in full force. The gaming the system was in full force. It may have it may have started because it was all corrupt. So they probably started doing things so corruptly that they didn't even care. They didn't even care if some states had a republic constitution, because most of the other states weren't even using theirs, because people by now have already been claiming to be a citizen of the United States when they weren't. And that was the point for the corporations to take over. Not the point. I don't think it was the point of the founders. I think it was a point by Lincoln's time that that's what they were doing. And even the 14th Amendment is written in such a way that would both appear to say two different things at the same time, that all citizens are citizen of the United States, or that citizens of the United States have dual citizenship. So you can read it by and understand it to be a true statement no matter which perception you're under. And I think that was the intention, to write it in such a way that it appeared to be legal to the legal system and appeared to be true. Um, but if you read it under the different perception, it's actually a lie. So if you read it thinking that you're a state citizen and a citizen of the United States, but you're not in the military, that's a lie. If you're reading it to say if you're in the military and you're in a state, then you also have to um, ab- uh, abide by the jurisdiction of that state, then that's the true meaning. So here in Texas Jurisprudence Third Edition, one in general, subsection one, statehood generally, and you can screenshot this, but it says it, and again, we're playing a little bit with words here to make it appear as though the Republic of Texas didn't exist, and that when the state of Texas was created, the Republic of Texas didn't exist anymore. But that's not true, because you have two political authorities inside Texas. You have two political and completely different states inside the boundaries of a single state. And these are two separate political governments. You have a federal government inside Texas that exists on federal lands, but you have people on those federal lands who are in the military, but they're still inside Texas. So they still have to abide by the Texas laws. Once they step off federal lands, they still have to abide by state laws. They're not just federal. Just like if you go to another country, I think there was a video not that long ago when a woman, she went to India, and she went into the hotel and she wasn't getting what she wanted. So she started having a fit and yelling and screaming, and they arrested her. And she said, "You can't do this to me. I'm an American." Okay, so she doesn't understand what political situation she's in, apparently, when she goes to India and starts acting like uh, a, an American with American rights in India, just like you, a regular citizen of Texas or whatever state, can't just walk onto federal lands and start just roaming around and doing whatever you want and going into buildings and such, because there's a fine line, and it's actually a really thick line, between military stuff or a military situation or the military state and a civilian. Civilians cannot interfere with military functions. And that's what it means by insofar as conflicted with federal authority. And federal authority, according to the Constitution, is the establishment of a peaceful military, or a peaceful military establishment are the exact words. So it cannot conflict with the Constitution, because the Constitution is performing military works on federal lands, and the state can't interfere with military works. The state cannot interfere with military works, even though the military is doing its works inside Texas. That's why you have Texas. Then you have, which Texas is the boundary. Then you have the Republic of Texas, which is a political state for civilians only. And then you have the state of Texas, which was supposed to be for military works. Okay, so I hope you're following me here. We have a civil government and we have a military government inside Texas. That's what the 14th Amendment is saying, that people in the military, citizens of the United States, are subject to federal jurisdiction. And that they're also subject to, because the federal constitution is talking mostly to the military. You can't take these laws away, like arms, because every state must be guaranteed its Republican form, which includes the right to a militia, the right to protect itself. You can't interfere with them speaking out against you. You can't interfere with all these things. You can't interfere with anything the states are doing, the republics are doing. You can't interfere with it. You just can't, because you're a military. You do your military things on the federal lands in the state, and that's it. They don't intermingle. Okay, as far as the federal government is not supposed to come off federal lands and start doing stuff to civilians. And civilians can't go onto federal lands and start doing things to the military unless the governor calls the Congress, the military Congress, the Congress of the United States, and says, hey, I need help here. In which case, the president, who is over both civil and military government, would approve it and say, yes, we'll agree to do that, and then you're going to pay us. So they would have, the state would have to pay the military, the national military, to come in and help resolve a conflict like a riot or something. So this is oil and water here. They don't mix. They're not supposed to mix. You have the military and then you have the civilian. And civilians are always over the civil law. The civil people are always over the military. That's in the Republic of Texas Constitution. That they don't come off their federal lands and just start poking at us. So the Republic, where it says the Republic and its laws uh, were abrogated insofar as it conflicted with military works, and the Constitution and laws of the United States. Once they became in force upon Texas immediately on its admission as a state. Again, the Republic of Texas still exists for civilians, the natural person. Okay, when I say person, I'm talking about the different masks, the different personalities that people have. So if you have a personality of wearing a military uniform because you're in the military, you're subject to federal law. You're subject to the federal authority. If you don't join the military, you're subject to civil law, Republic of Texas laws. If you join the military and you're subject to federal laws, then you come off the federal lands. You're now subject to state laws, even though you're still in the military. And in the military, you're still subject to federal laws. So a military person is subject to federal laws and the laws of whatever state he's in. And he can be in any of the states. So there was a senator or representative of some sort at some point in time who said, since they're not supposed to have a standing army, they'll just move people around all the time, constantly moving them around. So every 4 years or every 3 years or 2 years sometimes, you get stationed somewhere else. So because they're taking your body and moving it somewhere else, they're calling that not a standing army, even though there's constantly people standing somewhere in your state. There's a constant supply of military people in or on federal lands. But they say because they switch them around, it's not a standing military, which I would say is just a way of um, obscuring the truth that of actually having a standing military. Uh, so these are some of the ways they get around the Constitution. So when the so how did we get where we are today? Okay, so the federal government created all these federal agencies, which are really um, really military agencies or military agencies of the military. And then what they do is they um, during the Civil War, they switched the idea of what the political federal state was from military to commercial. And this was in part done by Rockefeller. He was pushing it for a long time, pushing it and pushing it and pushing it to make this military political state into a commercial state. And they changed their enacting clause from the United States and Congress assembled to the United States of America and Congress assembled. So they made it appear as though the military had state power. The military Congress had state power, which it does not. It never did. And when in the Constitution it says that the military Congress is supposed to only meet once a year, unless necessary. Like if we declare a war, then they need to meet more often, but they have to meet at least once a year. So the military Congress of representatives and senators and the president and the state secretary or whatever he is, secretary of state, were supposed to meet once a year. And I believe that's what they did when they met at Quantico, Virginia last year in whatever it was, August or September. So all these agencies created by the military back during the Civil War time that were starting to be made were given the power to contract. And they went from military to commercial. And all these contracts became currency. They are legal tender. Legal is contract and tender is voluntary. They're all supposed to be voluntary. So what they did was try to get people to believe that they had to be federal people or that they were federal people and that they had to make all these contracts to have rights. And so these agencies were given power to act as sort of a Congress by making their own laws. And then advertising, which is a word used in their papers and their documents, that these agencies were given the right to advertise or to entice people to make contracts with them, um, to get them to pay for certain services. So if you contract with me, I'll provide you a service. And that has all turned into commerce, commercial stuff, um, contracts, which are a legal tender. Um, so it's a situation where we went from a military to a commercial entity. So when the federal Constitution says no state shall this and no state shall that, I believe, at least in most situations, it's talking about the state it created, because in the Articles of Confederation, it says that all states have freedom, sovereignty, and jurisdiction, independence. That all the states, the republics, are allowed to do whatever they want, providing they don't interfere with the military work. So when a military acts as a commercial entity, the question is it doing a military work? Is it a military work to act as a commercial entity, pass laws, for agencies to pass laws and contract with people of the republics, civilians, to get them to sign contracts with them and pretend to be a citizen of the United States when they are not, so that the military, through its agencies, can rule over and basically dictate the rights to free citizens once that free citizen contracts with them and gives up their rights. So, who are citizens? Persons born within the jurisdiction. You're born in Texas on Texas lands, but then you get a birth certificate and you automatically obtain sort of a dual citizenship. You always have the right to the country or the place you were born in. You always have a right to return to it. It's called the right of return, to go back to the motherland. And when you go back to the motherland, guess what happens? You are forgiven for all your debts, and that goes back to um, that goes back to the Sumerian time. It's written in the stone tablets that when a person decides to return to his mother or his mother country, that all his debts go away because they stay in that legal state. They stay within the commercial state. And then we know that possession's 9/10 of the law. So whatever you possess is yours. And so you take it with you back to your legal state, back to where you're a natural person or a civilian. So when the 14th Amendment talks about subject to the jurisdiction, it's not just where you're born, but where you stand. So if you go to another country like India, you have to abide by their rules. If you go to Japan, you have to abide by their rules. Now, sometimes in other countries, they'll cart you off and take you to their jail. And other countries will, I don't know what they do, maybe different things. They might just kick you out or call the police and the police kick you out, but not take you to jail and just remind you you're in Japan, you're not in America. Just like if you step onto federal lands where there's a military post, you have to abide by the federal laws. But when you're off the military post, those federal laws don't apply. That's why they have to get you to contract with them. They have to get you to sign the contract saying that you are on their land. Basically, you're subject to their jurisdiction because your papers are where they sit. Your papers are in their offices. So let's look at that. When you get a driver's license, when you get a driver's license and you agree to uh, the transportation code, you're agreeing that you're a carrier because the word transportation legally in contracts means carrier. It's a person who is the movement of goods or persons from one place to another by a carrier. Okay, so they give you tickets because you have a commercial plate on your car. You show them a commercial driver's license. You have insurance, which I don't know, that's debatable whether it's required or not um, if you're not on their lands. But then you sign all their papers and their papers sit. in their jurisdiction. Your contract is in their jurisdiction. So you register your vehicle with the state of whatever, Texas, Maryland, Ohio, Pennsylvania, California, whatever. You're registering in their jurisdiction. And now your vehicle sits in their jurisdiction. And that's why they try so hard to get people to register their vehicles so that they can have control over it. Once they have control over it, all the issues that you have with the vehicle goes into their courts, sits in their courts. They have the power now because you registered in their jurisdiction. Your birth certificate brings you into their courts when there's an issue. Your marriage brings you into their court when there's an issue. Any contract you have with any agency, with any federal agency, brings you into their court. And they have to abide by certain rules, yes. And sometimes you win, yes. Sometimes you argue it wrongly, but it's still sort of on the line, yes. If you lose, uh, you'll keep trying. And if you keep trying, you might find out. And what might you find out? That you don't have to contract with them at all. There's no law that says you have to sign a contract because contracts are legal tender. They're voluntary contracts. Okay. And to be able to voluntarily contract, you have to be the age of 18. The age, what they call the age of majority, the age to contract. Originally, that was in this country intended to be so that you could join the military. At 18, you could join the military. That means you could sign a contract, you could agree because you were at that time supposed to be sound mind, of the right mind, no longer a child, not really knowing what you're doing. CPS, that's the birth certificates, the contract that they say allows CPS to bring you into their courts where mostly they win. Okay, so we can talk about citizenship and how complex and complicated it is as far as federal citizens. For example, the federal government was given the right to purchase lands inside states, and sometimes those lands had people living on them, and those people didn't want to sell their lands to the federal government. There's sort of a right to your history, a right to your heritage. So you don't have to sell your property to the federal government. You can keep it. But once the federal government purchased those lands from the state, they were still yours, but you became a federal citizen. So then you were a federal citizen and a state citizen. So when the federal government during the Civil War sent all their military into the states to take over the states, we sort of by some corrupt way, by force, became sort of federal citizens, even though recently in Texas Jurisprudence third edition, it states that the um, republic still exists and was abrogated only as far as when it conflicted with the federal authority. And that meant that the federal government could come into our country, into our state at any time and take it over, but not really because the civil authority is always higher than the military authority, according to our federal constitution or our republic constitution. And that's what the founders who wrote the federal constitution was afraid of, that the federal military, the military peace establishment would become a war establishment or a commercial establishment or any tyrannical establishment. And so they needed the republic constitutions to exist to help keep the federal military small, to keep the civil over the military so that the military never outgrew the civil. But what they've done is tricked us into believing that we're all citizens of the United States. And then they wrote the 14th Amendment that's that can be taken either way based on your perception, can be taken one way or the other, but most people don't perceive it the right way because they've been taught the wrong way. And so the wrong way is all they can see. And with all of the proof, uh, people still can't see it. So government policies or federal policies from their agencies that their agencies create, they act as a legislature, and they set these policies into code, and the code, once you agree to it and you sign a contract, becomes a law. So can they issue a warrant for or make a crime for something that was a policy written by an agency? I don't think so. I think it's only for crimes that they can issue warrants for. So if you're driving down the road and you get a ticket and you don't go to court, can they really issue a warrant for something that was a violation of a contract and not an actual law? Notice how the police always ask you for your driver's license so they can see what your driver's license says. Are you what class you are? And in Texas, C means carrier. Whether it's C or CDL, it means carrier. There's only a transportation code, and transportation means carrier. So if you look under the transportation code, it has all this stuff, all these vehicles, all these drivers, they all have to do this. Well, yeah, but transportation means carrier. So you're specifically talking about all people who are carriers, not people who are not carriers. But you have a birth certificate and you have children, and then you have the agency CPS that wants to bring you into courts, and the judge acts as the judge for the CPS agency. Or you get a ticket, and then the Department of Motor Vehicles or whatever it is, transportation brings you in, and the judge acts as a judge for the uh, DMV, whatever. But they're looking at you as a carrier and as someone who signed a contract, who has a driver's license, who has a license plate, who has maybe registration or whatever. And you're coming into their court, and that's how it works. So these are policies created by agencies who codify them and advertise by saying you have to do this and you have to do that. That's how they do it. You have to. They're policemen or salesmen. You have to, you have to, you have to. And once you do, you're under their authority, the federal authority, which acts as the military, but also commercial because it signs contracts, that has contracts. And they turn the military state into a commercial state because contracts are commerce, currency, legal tender. And so they claim they're mixing the two political situations. They're mixing the republics with the federal military state, the federal military political state. They're mixing them. They're trying to make them look like they're one so that everybody follows their rules and they can get money to grow their agencies. And that's one way that the federal government just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing because they advertise so well. Their police are out there advertising all the time. They're advertising, advertising, advertising. Every time they stop you, that's an advertisement. Every time they tell you it's the law, that's an advertisement. That's a sales tactic. The police are taught these various sales tactics, these scripts, to get you to be afraid and do what they want you to do so that they can bring you in under their jurisdiction and make money. So you following their laws, their policies makes money for them and grows them. And when you don't, they're going to get mad and they're going to stop you and they're going to stop you and stop you and stop you and they're going to harass you. And they're going to take you to jail and they're going to do all these things because they want your money. They want to grow. Those cops want those raises. They want that big policeman's ball. They want those new squad cars, those new radar systems, those new license plate readers, those new readers that sit uh, in parking lots. They're talking about putting readers at the front of HOAs to read everybody's plates. And guess what? When it reads your plate and you're not playing their game, they come after you. And then all your neighbors see. And then they're going to say, "Look, he doesn't grow the police state. Look at him. He's a bad person because he won't grow the police state. He won't get a license, register his car. He doesn't have plates on his car. He doesn't have a registration sticker. He doesn't have all this stuff. He won't help us grow the police state. He's a bad guy. The police are after him." And it's really just, you just don't want tyranny. You're living in your rightful civil state. Of course, they don't want you to know that you have a civil state. The civil government is higher than the military government. And the military is what we have right now. And it's not a martial law. It's not martial law at all. It's just existing. It's just existing and advertising itself, because remember, they allow themselves to lie but tell you you can't, which is just another lie. um they advertise themselves as being something they're not to get you to exist in it, which gives them power and authority. So once you leave that place, you're no longer subject to their jurisdiction. If you're not subject to their jurisdiction, how can someone from that state sue you when you're higher than them? How can someone from that state bring you into their court if you're higher than them? Now, if you go on actual federal lands and commit a federal crime, now you're in trouble. If you injure one of their people, okay, you can't go and just start injuring the military people or police or any, because that's a crime no matter where you're at. Okay, that doesn't mean they can bring you into their jurisdiction, but you have to stand in one of these courts, either a civil court or a federal court, military court, or their state of court that they've created and switched into a commercial court. And the only thing I think that people will really not understand is I just slipped my mind what I was going to say. Citizenship, probably people don't understand citizenship, and that's where your papers stand, where you decide to be a citizen. And see how they say the all funds coming into the hands of the state highway department. So it's whatever the state highway department, it's not called that anymore, I don't think. The state highway department can just go out and advertise and collect money. And that's how they get a hold of you. That's how they collect money. But the thing that I want people to understand the most, which is the thing that they might not understand, is that they changed a military political situation into a commerce. That's what I was going to say, that the federal constitution has certain things in it, like no state shall coin money. It's not talking about the civil state. The civil state's higher than the military state. The military cannot tell the civilians that they can't have money or coin money. They're telling their political state in the states that they've created, the state of Texas, which is the military state in Texas, they can't coin money. So you can't have these little federal states within all these republics and commonwealths coining money. That the money comes from a central place, which is the federal authority, the federal government, and they use that money to pay their military. And then their military can exchange, when they go home to their state, that federal money for their state's money. They can exchange it that way. Sometimes they're just given papers, like an IOU from the federal government. And then they go back to their state and they exchange that IOU for state currency. And then the state will exchange the IOU with the federal government. So there's a money system going on here. Let me see if I can explain this accurately. A state person joins the military. The military now owes that state person for doing his job in the military. The federal government will pay that person. That person will take that IOU as his payment from the federal government, go into his state and exchange it. The state will send that IOU back to the federal government, and the federal government will send the money, actual money, back to the state. And in the Constitution, it works like this, as far as I can tell. The states pay the debts. All the states together pay the debts for the military. That's the way it works. So when the federal government has a military that does work, commissioned and non-commissioned officers, and they need to build forts in a state, all the states together pay for that fort. So if you have a fort being built in Texas, it's not necessarily the burden of Texas to pay for that fort, because that fort will protect the whole country. So the government, the federal government, collects money from all the states and uses that money to do whatever it needs to do, wherever it needs to do it, whatever, right? Within the confines of the Constitution. So the states are paying, collectively, they all pay for each fort. So the states have the right, the republics and commonwealths have the right to coin money. They send some of that money to the federal government. The federal government uses that money to pay the debts, which are the building of the forts and the post offices and the post roads, or fort offices and fort roads, dockyard offices, dockyard roads, all these military things, and the military people, they all have to get paid. So once they send that money, the debts are paid. So instead of giving a man coins and have him travel all the way back home and get robbed of his coins, they give him an IOU with his name on it. And then he takes that IOU back to his state, where people back then, they knew each other, and he exchanges it for money, coins. The Republic gives him the money, and then he can go home with his money. And then the Republic exchanges that money with the federal government to get their coins back. So it took me a while to understand how all this worked, um, as far as the money situation in the Constitution. So these people who want to bring us into their situation of the Constitution being commerce, it does have commerce, but only within itself, within the confines of being federal commerce. So the federal government centrally coins money, but all of these little states inside the republics, all of their federal states inside the republics cannot coin money because now you've got so much currency flowing around everywhere, they can't keep track of it. And it devalues the currency for one, and they don't know where it's coming from. And if a state, if a military post inside Texas, if each military post can coin its own money, or if all the military posts inside Texas decide to coin their own money, you've got now a military inside Texas sort of branching off and becoming its own entity, because with money is power. If you have gold and silver, you have power. If you coin money, you have power. So they can't have their states creating a national military power that ends up being over the military power of all the states. So I don't know if that's really something you can understand right away, or if something maybe you need to think of, but they took those clauses about money and made it so that it meant no state could coin money, meaning not even the republics of commonwealths. But that's not what was intended. Maybe it was intended by the founders. I don't know that for a fact. It's hard to know what people's secret intentions were. But I don't think that's what it meant. But it was able to be used later, like after the Civil War, to mean something that it didn't mean. And that was after the military came in and took over the southern states, and then the northern states just sort of laid down and let the federal government walk all over them. So, exactly how to get back to the republic, um, I think, is to recognize that you don't have to um, contract with the state of Texas or the state of whatever, these federal people acting as state people. They call themselves a state, but they're not really a state. They're not a civil state. They're a military state, whether they see it themselves or not. That's how they make money. They're agencies created by the federal military government acting as a um, entity with power over commerce so that they can make money and enlarge themselves. And they do that by sending their salesmen out and telling you you have to do it. Um, when you have a baby, they send their salesman out. You have to have a birth certificate. When you're driving on the road, they send their salesman out, the police. You have to have a driver's license. You have to have a plate. You have to have registration. You have to have all these things. These people are salesmen for agencies. And I'm sure you can think of a whole bunch more. These are, I think, the most common ones, and the ones that sort of boil our blood are the roads and our children, the right to our travel and the right to our babies. Um, there's a lot more of them out there. The debt, um, for one, all these different licenses to do different things. They're just ways to get you to come under them, which makes them money. So uh, I'm not saying some of these things aren't good things, but I'm saying that some of them have become very tyrannical and don't even do the things that they were intended to do. They don't really protect society. They're used to just harass people and take their money and get them to be obedient to the government. And Machiavelli wrote about all this kind of stuff in his books. Um, that's what they do. Governments always become corrupt. Power corrupts. Um, what they have is never enough. They want more, 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 more. So they tell us in the documents you have to be a citizen of the United States or subject to their jurisdiction for them to do anything to you. So claim to be a citizen of the United States. Once you claim to be a citizen of the United States, they're saying, well, you're a citizen of the United States, so you're under our power and authority. And when you fight them, they don't like it, but they're nothing but agencies. And the judges are just sitting, acting as agents for the agency. And their um, attorneys, their attorneys are acting on behalf of the agency. They're not there for you. They're there to win. They're there to make sure that you stay in their jurisdiction by whatever means, to scare you, to start threatening to take your stuff, to accuse you of crimes, to make you look bad in front of your neighbors, your friends, on the news nowadays, on the internet. It's harassment, it's bullying, it's lying, fraud, deceit. It's all kinds of bad things. And we got here from a constitution that says right on its um, preamble that it's supposed to be an establishment of peace, tranquility, defense with a C, to defend yourself, not to attack. Defense with an S is when you attack. Defense with a C is when you're docile until you're attacked. To sum it up, to make it easy to understand, welfare, liberty, justice. Justice is supposed to be a good thing. Justice is supposed to be fairness, um, equality, and they've turned it on its head and made it commerce by force, contracts by force. And so we need to redefine what force is. But the standing law for a long time, for like hundreds and hundreds of years, has been that you can trick people into signing contracts, and that's fine because the law serves people who are awake, not asleep. The law serves the waking, not the sleeping. That's a maxim that goes back hundreds of years. Okay, so that's this video. I'm going to post it for Monday. I believe Monday is the 9th of February 2026. I hope you like it, share it, subscribe it. And if you don't want to do that, at least talk about it to people. That's the situation we're in. We're in a federal government, federal military peace establishment pretending to be a commerce establishment, forcing us to sign contracts or be harassed. And they do it through the use of their salesmen. And to go, their salesmen are their agents, right? They're officers. They call them agents and officers, but they're salesmen to us. And they use them to go out and harass us, to get us to um, comply, which are their ways of advertising. Okay, so to go back to the Republic is to let them know that you just don't want to contract with them anymore. You don't want to do that anymore. Taxes, the IRS is an agency. It has policies. It passes the policies off into code and then calls them laws, but they're not actually laws until you agree and sign their paperwork. Once you agree and sign their paperwork, you come subject to the jurisdiction thereof. 14th Amendment. But not to do that means that you stand as a natural person in the Republic. A natural person is still a person because it's a mask. You know, no matter who you call yourself or what you call yourself, you stand where you stand. You stand in their jurisdiction, you're a legal person. You're a citizen of the United States, a federal person under federal laws, subject to being forced into contracts by their agents and their salesmen, agencies and salesmen. You go back to the Republic, um, and then, you know, that's where you are. So There was a guy who said something about you write an affidavit as a sort of a declaration of independence and you file it in their court or in their like a court of record or whatever. But I have found no court of record or any court that will allow you to just go in and arbitrarily file those laws. And he says that way when they violate it, you can sue them. But here's the thing, they won't accept that paper. But if you get a ticket or something happens, you take that paper with you to their court and you tell them. That's what you tell them, that you are independent, you're in the republic, and maybe that'll work, maybe it won't. If you got something that works and it works every single time, I won't argue with it. Just keep doing that. But at some point in time, it's going to get to where that doesn't work. Because that the point is for them to be salesmen and to bring you in. They're trying really hard to get you to buy their product, which is their jurisdiction, which is their driver's license, their birth certificates, all these things that aid in federal growth, aid in agency growth. So they put these people in charge of these agencies who are going to grow the agency. That's what they want. They want business people going out there and growing their agency. They want them to hire people who are just like them. They're going to go out there and they're going to sell, sell, sell. You better or else. They use force. Most salesmen just, they have a different way of doing things like a car salesman. They still use their tactics and strategies. But the tactic and strategy of the agency is to act as though they have an authority that they don't have because they can't force you. They can't force you to do anything because it's all contractual and contracts are legal tender and legal tender is a voluntary thing. It's a voluntary contract. Just like the use of the dollar is legal tender, it's a voluntary contract to use it because so many people are involved and caught up in their jurisdiction, and being in their jurisdiction they're not allowed to use gold and silver as legal tender because gold and silver cannot be legal tender because gold and silver is not contractual, but gold and silver um is natural. It's still a tender, it's money, it's not currency. It can be currency because currency is whatever is current. They can take gold and silver as part of their contracts. And I really think that's where they're moving with all of this. And that's why they did what they did, is that they wanted to create a system where they could use force and get you loyal to the system and thinking that's the only way that things can exist or the only way things are, so that at some point in time they could turn their paper contracts using paper money into a gold and silver contract so that they could take your gold and silver once you have it, once they reestablish that as the currency, the money as the currency, the actual money. And I think everything has a purpose, and I think that's one of them. Not to mention to wear us down to the point to where we just don't fight anymore, and they can move us into a socialist system because everyone's so stressed out and overworked that they can't fight all the battles that need to be fought. So, okay, so that's this video. I'm going to end it here. Hope you like, share, subscribe, um, talk about this to other people, and just do your best, I guess.